This is the first video in a new series on this channel called Font Focus. Now, in each of these videos, we're going to look at a font and we're going to judge it. We're going to see how it looks, see how the letter forms look, see if they look nice. And we're going to see where we might be able to use the font, how we might be able to use the font in novel-like books. And in this first video, we're looking at the font Trajan. Well, specifically, we're looking at the font Trajan Pro 3, which is an Adobe font. If you go to the Adobe Fonts site, you can see lots of them. You can see Trajan Pro 3 on there, and you can see samples of it. Being an Adobe font, you have to have an Adobe subscription to use it. And that in itself might be enough of a reason not to use it, because Adobe subscriptions are very annoying and vastly overpriced, even the most basic ones. And Adobe products are extremely annoying as well. In fact, it's one of the few redeeming qualities of an Adobe subscription is access to the fonts, which are often very nice. That might be on its own a reason not to try to use Trajan Pro 3. The name Trajan Pro 3 suggests that there was a Trajan Pro 1 and a Trajan Pro 2. I've never seen them. I don't know if they ever made it into public view. Perhaps they didn't. Perhaps they were just like prototypes. I don't know for certain if there are other Trajan-like fonts or other Trajan fonts available just around on the internet that are maybe, they're not identical to this, but they're still based on the same things, because this is we'll get onto that. This is based on some particular letter forms on a column, and I don't know if there are other Trajans available. I don't know if there's a sort of default Trajan that maybe was used in the past but is not so accessible now. I think, if I remember correctly, I think there's on Google Fonts, which is a much easier set of fonts to use. I think most of them, if not all of them, are free to use. But I think on Google Fonts, I think there is a font that is similar to Trajan, kind of like semi-modernized Trajan, which we might look at in another Font Focus video. But I think it's a sort of a slightly adjusted Trajan-like font. Trajan as a font is very famous. It's very well known. And it's used in quite a few places. I've certainly seen Trajan used in various books. Trajan, I mean, we're jumping ahead a bit here, but Trajan often seems to be used for headings, and particularly on title pages and half-title pages. It's very, very, I say very common. Of all the places it's used, that seems to be mainly where it's used. So it is used a fair amount. It's quite well known, and I mean, there's various reasons for that. So Trajan, the font, the modern font, is based off some letter forms that are on the column of Trajan, or Trajan's column. I can't remember which way around it is, which is an actual sort of relic that it still exists in Italy. That's what the letter forms are based off. People have, font designers have gone to that column and they've taken sort of photographs and other, whatever they call, where you sort of get a piece of paper and you rub chalk on it and take an imprint. They've done that on that column, and then they've used that to construct these letter forms in digital font form. So Trajan is as a font. I mean, the concept of a font only has existed since the concept of printing press, but Trajan as a style of letter form, as a typeface, has existed for a very long time. If you use this, you're using a very, very old font. It's been around for thousands of years. It has a very strong classical element to it, not just in its appearance, but in its history. It's a fantastically old font. Unlike a lot of obviously the sort of typical modern fonts are the sans serif fonts, but if you're using those only have a history of a few years or a few decades or something. But Trajan, it really is a classical font in that sense. So it's fairly well used. It's pretty famous, and it's got quite a history to it. Trajan Pro 3 is the one you can get from Adobe. Maybe there's others out there. I feel like there must be some others out there, but I've never come across them. Now, something that's worth mentioning before we look at these specific letter forms and we start looking in detail, Trajan is a purely uppercase font. So this here, what I've written here is actually, if I change this into Times New Roman, I have actually got lowercase letters in here. But then when I change it into Trajan, they get all made. Well, they are uppercase, but this actually here is small capitals, or small caps, as it's often referred to. You can see that this capital is not as big as this one. So they're all uppercase letters, but the ones which were typed as lowercase letters become small capitals letters, and then the actual uppercase ones just remain uppercase. And there is a reason for that, and the reason for that is that so if you didn't know, uppercase letters are the original letters. When you go back to sort of 2,000 years ago, uppercase letters just were the letters, and we didn't have lowercase letters. Lowercase letters evolved over the subsequent centuries. Essentially, when people were, they were trying to writing by hand these uppercase letters, and they would just become gradually more cursive. And as they did so, they changed in form, and they became simpler all the time, and smaller and more rounded and that sort of thing. And that's where we get the lowercase letters from. And then the lowercase letters and the uppercase letters joined back together again, as we sort of, So if I understand it correctly, the way that it sort of happened is, we would use uppercase letters for drop caps in books. You have an illuminated uppercase letter as the first letter of your page. So that introduces this idea of so capital letters are these kind of special letters now that we use in certain circumstances. And then I would imagine from there, they would start to get used, particularly if you're using sort of black letter fonts, you might use uppercase letters for people's names, or probably, in a lot of religious texts, the word God was probably capitalized or had a capital letter at the start of it. And so then that starts to introduce the idea of we use capital letters at the start of words when the word is special in some way. And then from there, in English, we only use capital letters typically for proper nouns, at the start of proper nouns. In German, of course, this is a real tangent here, but in German, of course, they use it at the start of all nouns. And we sort of did in English, I think, for a bit. So that's how the two, the uppercase and lowercase came back together again, and now we use both all the time. But because Trajan is such an old style of letter form, and because it's such an old typeface, and it comes from before we had lowercase letters, that's why Trajan does not have lowercase letters, because the original style it's based on didn't. And that's quite important to know for Trajan as a font, because it means that you would never use Trajan as a paragraph font. You would never just use this as, if I suppose if you were really determined to follow a certain style, you could. But typically, in novel-like books, you wouldn't use it as your paragraph font because everything would be uppercase. And the result is that Trajan is typically used for headings. So you see it used as the title page or the half title page font. You could use it as a chapter heading font as well. Looks very nice in chapter headings. So that's a bit about how Trajan is used. Now let's actually delve into the font and the actual letter forms that we get. I'm going to make this a bit bigger here. Take it up to 100. Okay, I can go up to 110. Can I zoom in a bit? There we go. Get as close as we can 200%. So now we can really start to see the letter forms. The letter form T is always an interesting one to look at. But I mean, actually, we can already see a lot of commonalities going on here. The serifs, in particular, are really drawing my attention. So if we look down here at the foot of the letter forms, we've got the serifs going off. What's quite interesting to see is that the serifs are asymmetrical in length. So that one only goes off a certain way. This one goes off much further. And that seems to be the case with all of them. I mean, that one in particular is very asymmetric, but that's pretty much always the case with the letter A. So you can see they're asymmetric. There's that's quite a nice gentle curve to them, a nice elegant curve to them. There's a bit of an indent underneath the foot, but it's very, very slight. I'd say that's more slight than a lot of other old style fonts, which I think is, I think that's actually contributing to the elegance of Trajan. I personally find Trajan a very elegant font. In fact, the whole shape of this letter form down here, see it very gracefully widens. It doesn't, it sort of starts to widen about here, and then it gradually gets a bit more. It's not a sharp widening. It's quite graceful, and then a very sort of slight indent underneath. It's very elegant. We see that on the top of the J as well. Same sort of thing on the top of the J and the top of the N. I think that's contributing to the elegance of the font quite a bit, actually. We can also see with the letter T, we've got angled serifs on each side, again asymmetric. Very slight flare upwards there. That's particularly elegant. It's these very slight flares, which just gets a bit wider at the end. That's contributing a lot to it. And then we have this one is pointing ever so slightly inwards, which is something we have seen with other old style fonts, which is particularly nice. The contrast between the thicker and thinner parts of the letter forms, I mean, we can see on the letter A here. I mean, actually, let's start going through some of the individual letter forms. We've already seen, and then we can make them bigger. How big can we get? 200. That'll do. Let's move it across. In something like, I mean, in fact, let's actually look at the letter form O, which is always good for the vertical stress. So we can see there's this feels like quite a sort of medium amount of vertical stress. We're not going too thin at the the thin parts of the letter form. That's quite a nice balance. I think if it were a Didone font, obviously that would go much thinner. I think I've seen. Let's start putting it next to some other things. Let's have a look at. It's always Times New Roman is always a good one to compare it to. I mean that's interesting in and of itself that Times New Roman at 200 points is actually smaller. Is that? Did I type uppercase? No, that is uppercase O. You can see that it's got more of a tilt to it than something like Times New Roman. I mean, Times New Roman is probably not a good one to compare it to. Let's also, oh dear. Let's actually compare it to something like E.B. Garamond. There we go. E.B. Garamond, older style font. Times New Roman's a bit weird. So there we go. That's quite a comparable slant. I'd say that comparing these two, E.B. Garamond and Trajan, there's you can see the slight diagonal line that passes through as a not quite an axis of symmetry, but sort of close to an axis of symmetry, just about there. But there seems to be greater symmetry between the two sides of the letter form. With E.B. Garamond, there seems to be a little bit less symmetry between the two. It sort of seems to bulge a little bit more in places. I'd say Trajan has a bit more difference between the strength of the thick bits and the thin bits than E.B. Garamond does. Probably also contributes to its elegance. You don't want really thin bits here, but there's a balance between the two that you have to find. Let's go back to there. I mean, my God. So now we're comparing E.B. Garamond and Trajan for the letter A. I mean, you can see a big difference there. Obviously, E.B. Garamond, and that's quite common of Garamond fonts and a lot of other stuff fonts. You get that dent in there. Trajan's quite elegant in that it just ignores that. It's just going to go straight to the apex. Narrower curves by the looks of it in some of these corners here. Again, I think that makes it very elegant. And I mean, EB Garamond, you can see, the foot of the letterforms here, that really sticks out there. Look, it's absolutely minuscule for Trajan. It really, they're almost understated as serifs go. Let's go in letter B. Probably isn't a particularly interesting one. We've a lot of the features we've already seen with these curves around here. I'm actually going to jump ahead to the letter R. I think one of the things that's particularly elegant about Trajan is the angle and the slope of this sort of extending foot. This is almost a perfectly straight, wide line here, and then it just gradually curves off towards the end there. Whereas if you look for something like EB Garamond, I mean that's almost almost looks like it's been made by quite a thick pen or something as it extends down there. And this I think the angle is not too different, but there's something about this that makes it look like it's dipping down more. Possibly the way that it joins on here. This is particularly elegant. This does really just look like the letter P with. Is that the right? Oh no. Okay, so there is actually quite a bit of difference. I was going to say that almost does look like the letter P with the extended foot, which is, I mean, it's what the letter R is really. Let's have a look at some more. Make sure we are actually still looking at the fonts correctly. Not too much of interest there, I imagine. With a lot of these early letters, we're not going to see anything particularly interesting. That's interesting. A particularly tall letter E with very, very short extension off to the right. Much closer balance between the three extensions here, whereas certainly I think in other fonts it's quite common for the middle one to extend nowhere near as far as the other ones, which is quite interesting. That's also true with the letter form for F. G is always an interesting one. There we go. So yeah, again here it's the serifs and the ends of these which really contribute a lot to the look of Trajan. We've got this nice almost flat top here, but just not quite, a very slight dip. Very understated serifs with a nice flare on the end of this vertical bit. Nothing sticking out here as you get with a Garamond-like font. And again, just the overall curvature really of this sort of sweep around here is particularly elegant, with the sort of very gradually gets thinner around to the top here. This letter form seems very sort of heavily weighted right in the middle, whereas it seems slightly lower, that the weighting is a bit more. H probably isn't. I'm not seeing anything really more there, nor with I. J, often an interesting one. There we go. A real difference there. I mean, in EB Garamond here we've got, this is a ball terminal really, right at the end. Whereas with Trajan we've just got this gradual sweep down and a taper off. It's very, very elegant. That's a very nice letter form. I really like that. And, you can imagine that next to other letter forms. Just goes down to the end and just a slight sweep underneath. Very, very nice. Let's have a look at K. We're seeing, again, lots of similar things here. Very similar sweep down to the letter R. It's almost perfectly straight, and then just gradually, it's like with the letter J, it just sort of sweeps off to the side. Nothing too fancy. It's quite understated. And again, up here, this head, we're not getting too much veer off to the side as we do here. Of course, I realise, comparing this just to EB Garamond, we're very much comparing just these two fonts. We're not looking exclusively at the features of Trajan Pro in a broad and abstract sense. JK, we're not likely to see anything interesting with L, but M we probably are. Oh, that's now too big. We have, this is one of the interesting things, differences. I mean, if I change that to Times New Roman again, Times New Roman, has these vertical lines for the sides of the M, which really affects the overall look of a font. And I mean, that's quite almost characteristic of Didone fonts, is that strong verticality. whereas with Trajan, I mean, that's a very nice, elegant slant that we've got going on there. It seems a little bit more symmetric than something we might get in Epigaramond. Of course, Epigaramond, it's not trying to be symmetric, but we've got more of a slant on this side than on this side. This there's more of a symmetry to this. The main, not so much on this foot, but and obviously we've got the different strengths to the lines, but the overall shape has quite a bit of symmetry. Let's have a look at N. Interesting with N that that's often the case with N, that you get this taper off as you go up here and down here. I think this is. I think this letter form goes well with the rest. I think there's perhaps something about it though that doesn't quite suit the rest of the font. That's often a difficulty with N. If you look, like, one of the really big differences here with this N, we have a serif off to this side here, and I think that's probably true with a lot of Times New Roman. Again, we've got the serif off to the side here, and with Trajan we don't, and that really affects the overall look of Trajan. I'm not sure how Trajan would look if it did have something going off there. Might look a little bit more. There's something a little bit uneven, perhaps, about this letter form, whereas it's Times New Roman, it's so geometric. Very, very even there. Let's change it back again. We've already looked at O and P. Q is always a fascinating one to look at. So there we go. Now, you can really, really see the style of Trajan going on here. So obviously we have the O of the Q, and then a really long tail off to the side here. That'll look very nice. If I put a U after it, it'd be, look, obviously these two letters appearing, or U appearing most often after Q. So you got to see this pair of letters a lot, and look at that. Isn't that so elegant? You've got this tail that goes off, and it goes almost completely under. I think that's almost going right to the edge of where the U goes. So that really joins them together. That's very nice. The way those two work together, and there's almost a this white space here. It's not the same width all the way around, but it almost feels quite naturalistic. The shape of that space between the two, and it's a sort of similar width to here. That's very, very nice. You can always tell a lot about a font from the letter Q. Whereas if you compare Epigaramond's Q, it starts much lower. It starts right in the middle, as opposed to this, which starts off the side, and it doesn't go anywhere near as far. Not as daring as Trajan. Let's have a look at S. We're not really seeing much that's different there. This is very elegant. As I said, that's going to be the word of the day for this font. It is very good. That's, again, very nice balance between the stronger sections and the thinner sections. We've got it TST. There's probably not that many that are interesting that are left. W is probably the main one. So a very obvious difference here. In Epigaramond, a W. W is such a stupid letter because it's clearly a double V, and with Epigaramond it is literally a double V, and you can see it in here. It's actually properly joined up. I don't know actually if the W letter form might be a more modern thing for Trajan, because if I remember correctly, I don't think the Romans, I don't think Latin has a W, does it? Someone remind me of that in the comments, because Latin, I don't think, needed it, because it just used V, which was pronounced like, essentially took the place of the modern letter U. And the W, the reason why we call a W is because it is supposed to be a W. If you go back in time, you start seeing texts where they did actually just write two letters U, which seems like a sort of bizarre thing to do. Why would you need to write two of them next to each other? But they did, and then eventually it became a letter in and of its own right. And then at some point, presumably, again the confusion between the letters U and V, it ended up getting sharpened into the shape of what we now think of as a V. But anyway, this is a properly sort of joined W. Looks a bit strange actually at this font size. It almost looks like a perfect rotation of the letter M. I don't think it is. I think it is. Yeah, no, it's not a perfect rotation, but it really, really, really almost looks like it, doesn't it? No, it's definitely not. I mean, there's loads more space. That would look very, very strange if it were just rotated. Let's have a look at X. Often changes a lot. Okay, not all that much. Nope. Not all that much interesting going along with Trajan X. I wondered if they might do something a bit more swooshy. Let's have a look at Y. That's interesting. That's quite a broad Y. Really, quite a lot of space at the top. But this seems to start quite. I mean, if you look at the difference in the heights of these letters, this one's a lot higher, but the join of the Y is at the same height. Z, I imagine, is uncontroversial. Yeah, it's a great Z. Simple, elegant. All the features we've seen before, the nice flaring at the ends. Look at that serif. That's particular. Look at that. That's a very nice curve up to the serif there. Very, very elegant, and it is there as well. Whereas with EB Garamond, it's a little bit more organic. Let's also look at numbers. These are probably. I'm just going to go through these quite quickly. There may not be anything of interest. These are fairly standard looking numerals. If we put a 5 there, like this is not a great comparison now because EB Garamond has some unusual numerals. So if we just put that in Times New Roman, we might guess, gosh, that's very ugly, isn't it? That's very, I've never looked at Times New Roman's 5 letter form so closely. That's not nice at all. Let's for fun, let's look through the Times New Roman numerals. Wow, they did not put much effort in with the 4, did they? You wouldn't even know that's Times New Roman. It's Times New Roman. You wouldn't even know it, would you? The Times New Roman numerals are all over the place. Yeah, I could hardly. I mean, you can sort of tell that's Times New Roman. That could be anything, really, couldn't it? Let's actually let's compare some of these. One is uncontroversial. Gosh, yeah, the Times New Roman numerals. Oh, gosh, that's so bizarre. That's very geometric. It's got a. I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? It's got a serif down here, but not up here. That top part, you almost wouldn't even know that it is a letter or a numeral. And then 3, again, no serif up here. I don't know if that technically counts as a ball terminal. I call it a blob terminal. 4, yeah, they put in no effort. It makes me think that there's something wrong with that letter. That just looks so unlike Times New Roman. Whereas, yeah, Trajan, very elegant. 5, we've already seen. 6, oh, that's a nice elegant 6 for Trajan. Looks quite Garamondish. Sometimes you get. Now look at that. Look at that sweep down there. It's not a serif, but it's just a flare. It gets wider. Very, very nice. I like that. Letters, numerals can go one of two ways. Sometimes they can. I mean, there's nothing particularly much about that number 8. It can go one of two ways. So, sometimes the font might have really, really weird numerals, and sometimes they're completely uncontroversial, as seems to be the case with Trajan. Let's also look at the question mark. The question mark. I mean, let's also put one of those in EB Garamond. Oh gosh. So there we go. We have Trajan, we have Times New Roman, and we have EB Garamond. The question mark seems to be one of the most difficult letter forms to construct for font designers. It either seems, very rarely do I see a nice looking question mark. I mean, I'm a big fan of EB Garamond, but that's its question mark. What on earth is going on there? That is just such a strange thing. It almost looks like a mistake, doesn't it? Just like some ink has spilled onto the page. That's and the dot seems way too big compared to the upper part. that's very. I've never been a fan of the EB Garamond question mark. You don't really notice it so much when you're dealing with smaller. Once the font size decreases, you don't really notice it so much. But it's pretty ugly. I think it's the exclamation mark. I mean, the exclamation mark is very simple. The Times New Roman question mark is it's like tolerable, but at least has the shape of a question mark. This ugly sort of blob terminal on the end that they've decided to stick on there. But my goodness, look at the Trajan question mark. That is what a question mark should look like. That is very elegant. I mean, I might be tempted to, just make this a much simpler ending, much like going on here. But using that kind of serif for the top instead of a blob, as Times New Roman and certainly the Didone fonts do, that's very, very nice. That is one of the nicest looking question marks I have ever seen. And there's loads of other punctuation and strange symbols like pound signs and dollar signs and so on. These all look. That's a very nice percent sign. Let's have a look at that in the other ones. Gosh, so that's Times New Roman's percent sign. They didn't really try with that one, did they? I always like this, the connected percent sign, very, very elegant. And EB Garamond's, again, that looks like that's a low effort percent sign. This line here doesn't seem to be much. Let's is there anything else? I mean, there's only sort of modern symbols left. Really, it's often interesting to look at. Oh, that's a nice comma. That's a nice comma. EB Garamond's comma is not too bad either, but that is very nice. I imagine the apostrophe. Look at that! Look at that! Is a very nice apostrophe. I imagine that's similar. I imagine the quote marks here are the same. There's only a few other marks that are really relevant. We could. It's also the @ sign, not a classical letter at all, but my goodness, they've done well. For Trajan, considering that Trajan doesn't even have lowercase letter forms, and this is a lowercase letter form, they've done well with that. If you're using the @ sign in Trajan, something's gone very, very wrong, and you need to start again, because that Trajan is far too elegant for the @ symbol. So there we go. That's a bit of a look at Trajan. Let's shrink things back down. It is a particularly elegant one. We could look at some. If I just zoom out again, back to 140. When I say that, so I've not used Trajan in any of my books, but if I I wouldn't have used this for something like on the subject of trolls, but if something like this could suit Zolantis, something like that. I didn't use it for that, but if I'd had the title page, this is an A4 page, which is way too big, obviously, for a novel. But if I just sort of start positioning this very, very crudely in the style of a title page, and we zoom out so you get a sense of what it looks like. There we go. That's the sort of thing that it would look like if you use this for a title page. That's very nice, very elegant, very simple. You've just got this would be a half title page, obviously, but the title page would just have my name underneath it, but if you just have something like that, very, very elegant. It's great for title pages, and so if you are to use it for something like that, you just have to pair it with another font that it goes well with for the rest of the book, and I think there's plenty that it goes well with. So very elegant to use that, very elegant font overall. It's sort of unfortunate that you can't use it in more places because it is such a nice font to look at. So that is a bit of a look at the font Trajan. Next time, I don't know what font we're going to be doing next time. Possibly another Adobe font, or possibly a At some point we'll do EB Garamond, one of my favourite fonts, apart from the question mark. But that is a bit of a look at Trajan.